Welcome back to Communicology. As always, if you like the content you hear today, please like, share, and subscribe. And let's jump into our topic of the day, and that is the idea of personality types. Now, everyone's got a personality, and someone's got this bit of tweak or this bit of essence to them, and we try to figure out, well, how do I talk to this person? And how do I get along with this person? Or how do I stop fighting with this person? Or whatever the situation is. So whether it's a significant other, a friend, a family member, a roommate, a teammate, a coworker, whatever, the easiest way in is not to say, well, that's just the way he is or she's just like that. It's a lot easier just to figure out what's the personality type of that person and then shift accordingly in our communication patterns. And it's also easy to know, too, who we are. So whenever we try to get in a communication situation, we then can talk and understand how to best talk to somebody, how to best interact with somebody, and also maybe how to shift and change when the time comes, say, for a job interview. So let's look at the different types. Now, they typically break down into 4 different patterns, and typically we find ourselves strongly in one with a foot in another, and then play around with the other 2. It's not likely that you're solidly 100% into one, nor is it likely that you're divided evenly across all 4. You're typically solidly in one, a foot in the other, and you dabble with the other 2. So those 4, we have amiables, analyticals, expressives, and drivers. So those kind of people, those 2 personality types make up, basically who we are. So let's take a look at them one by one. And we'll start first with the analytical types. In analytical types, as the name sounds, they like to analyze things. They like logic. They like things that make sense. So, as you can guess, they're very comfortable with things like numbers, facts, figures, reason, which makes them very much uncomfortable with people, because people aren't logical. People aren't predictable. You have a 1 and a 1, you put it together and you get your 2. That makes sense. That's easy. That's predictable. That's stable. I can put that into a spreadsheet and find happiness. These people are perfect when it comes to doing things like your taxes, keeping your bank information straight, building bridges and building skyscrapers, all that good fun stuff like that. Engineers and accountants and all that good stuff that deals with specific things that make sense, that are logical, reasoned, orderly, very easily put into boxes. And analyticals love that. And it's a good thing. I mean, we need those people. You don't want someone who's sloppy with facts and figures to build a bridge. You want somebody who understands the load capacities and the distance and how to get it across the span and, what materials to use. You want people who are like super logical and passionate for that stuff to be the ones designing that bridge. So what's the negative? What's the downside? Well, as I mentioned before, they're not very good with people because people are chaotic and messy. And chaotic and messy drives these people, the analyticals, crazy. Because again, it's not rational. It makes no sense. So they look at people who are very much, they're very much, squishy at best. And they don't like how they can't be controlled. And so it's just easier just to keep them at arm's length and maybe avoid them. So this kind of person enjoys actually quiet time, enjoys getting away from people, doesn't mind being in a closed door office and hiding from everybody. You can understand, and sympathize with that kind of person. Like when you need some peace and quiet, which everyone likes their peace and quiet and to get away from people now and then. But typically it's just to get your own self in order, whereas the analytical, they want to get away because it can't be controlled. So you can see that being a problem. Now, the second type I want to talk about is an amiable. An amiable personality is the kind of person who's very much like the golden retriever of people. They love everybody. They try to get along with everybody. They go along to get along even when things aren't going their way. So golden retriever, I mean, they're happy to be along no matter what the situation is. It's just as long as they're part of the situation, they're cool with it. But the downside is, of course, they can easily be overrun, and that's not a very fun thing. So on the plus side, they're perfect for when you want to get things done, and you need someone who's going to be dedicated to the task, and more importantly, dedicated to the team. So amiables, like to go along to get along, and that includes pleasing people. Amiables love to make sure people are pleased. So whatever they have to do, whatever self-sacrifice they have to make. So if they have to stay 10 hours, 12 hours on the job to get the thing done, they'll do it because they don't want to let the team down. You can easily see the negatives coming up to, on this one, because you instantly see someone who can easily be abused that way, turned into a doormat. And as a result, you end up seeing somebody who gets overrun often because they're not willing to speak up and say, you know what, no, I'm not doing that, because they don't want to upset people. They don't want to rock the boat. So when someone comes on and says, do this, yes, I'll do it. How about do this? Yes, I'll do it. Well, here's this other thing. Yes, I'll do it. And it creates this kind of problem. Also, they're also the kind, maybe one that you'll recognize. Where do you want to go out to eat? It doesn't matter. Sure it does. Everyone has preferences. Oh, no, it's fine. It doesn't really matter at all. When deep down we all know it matters. And if you pick the wrong thing, they're probably going to be quietly resenting you for it. So this is a problem that amiables have, because they're unwilling to speak up and say, you know what, I could go for Mexican tonight. Or I could really go for pizza or whatever, but they don't want to say that, because as soon as they do, someone might be like, well, I really don't feel like Mexican. Now they feel guilty because they've imposed their thoughts on someone else and deprived them of theirs. So they typically stay quiet, or they say, oh no, I'm fine. Whatever you pick is good with me. And we know that's a lie, but that's how amiables cope with that. And you can see where that causes friction in relationships, because the problem with an amiable, eventually they're going to get to a part where they explode. So if you, or somebody who, after long times of issues, finally just explodes one day and tells you everything that's wrong, there's the hallmark of an amiable right there. Because instead of dealing with it as it comes up, they just let it build and build into this massive pressure cooker until it finally just blows. So that's an amiable. The third one I want to talk about today is an expressive. Now, expressives are people who talk and talk and talk, hence expressives. They will express what's on their mind, what's in their brain, what's in their heart. They'll tell you everything that's going on, and they'll gladly do it. They're the kind of person you get on the elevator with, and by the time you get to the third floor, you know everything about their family history. They just will talk and talk and talk your ear off. Obviously, positives are abundant. They are super, people. They love getting involved with people. They love talking. They love doing anything they can to make sure everyone's hype and excited. They're also big picture people. If you know someone in your life, or maybe you're the person who goes, man, wouldn't it be cool if, whatever the answer to that is, that's most likely an expressive. Like, wow, wouldn't it be neat if we could do this thing, whatever the thing happens to be. Or, wow, I just got this great idea. That's, again, perfect example of an expressive person. They love being part of the gang. Wherever you're going, they don't care. They just want to be part of it, but they will tell you what they like and don't like. So if you ask if you put out the question, who wants to go where all do y'all want to go to eat? Expressive will probably be the first one to tell you, because they'll gladly tell you. Like, you asked, here's the answer. So when you start looking at negatives, you can kind of see where this is going. They can be overbearing because they will tell you everything. And that's a little bit daunting at times. There's times when you're just like, please stop talking. Thank you. But they'll just keep talking anyway because they're expressive. It's hard to shut up. Like, maybe they could do it for like 20 seconds, maybe even make it a minute, but you could just see them like bottled up, like they're ready to explode because they have to say something. And someone's talking about something and they just have to interject too, and they have to get into it. So they're super abrasive in that manner. They can be really harsh. They can also be very blunt. I mean, you asked, they'll tell you, like, does this dress make me look big? Oh, here it comes. So look out. You got to be careful when you ask expressive questions, because you're going to get the truth. Now, if you want the truth, there you go. But if you're not ready for truth, be very careful, because they will tell you. So expressives do come across sometimes as very overbearing, arrogant, because they seem like they know everything or want to know, or at least tell you how much they know about things. So they can come across as arrogant, and that's obviously a problem. Also, if that's not necessarily they're bad at keeping secrets, but if they know something, they kind of want to share it and tell people. So you have to be careful with secrets around expressives until you kind of get the feeling like, is this someone I could really trust with this kind of information? Because they'll talk and talk and talk, and sometimes things might just fall out. So that's that one. The last one is the driver. Now, the driver we're very accustomed to understanding. Typically, you see this person as the quarterback or the president or the head of some major company. They're the kind that just like takes charge, just drives forward. They drive everything forward. They have these big visions, and they just want to get it done. And they don't care how it gets done. They just get it done. If you've ever been in a car growing up, and it's dad behind the wheel, and he needs to figure out where he's going and needs to ask for directions. Doesn't want to stop and ask for directions. He'll just figure it out on his own because he'll get it going. He'll know how to do it. Stopping for directions would be weakness. So let's keep going. Or maybe you tried pushing the rules at home and you heard it's my way or the highway. Well, that's very much a driver statement. And so the idea that they know what's best, they know what's right, they know how to get there. And maybe you even heard in the workplace, I don't care how you do it, just get it done. That's a driver mentality. So that's clearly a sign of a driver when you hear that kind of thing. They're very focused. They're very task-oriented. Not as much people-oriented, but they're very task-oriented. So they will push and get that thing done. They're the kind of person at quarterback who's throwing into triple coverage. And if they get a touchdown, they claim credit. And if it gets intercepted, they blame the receiver for not doing his job and stepping up. But they're willing to take those risks. They love taking risks. And you look back at someone like the Analytical, they love order and things that they won't take risks because risk is inherently unstable. Drivers love risk because there's a high reward if you get it right. So they're the kind of person who clearly, gladly just jump in and do what they got to do. A lot of downsides, though, because, man, they can be arrogant. And they could also be very bossy and not as that concerned for people either. Again, if I don't care how you get it done, just get it done. That's, you can see how they can run right over people. Remember the amiable person, how they can be abused? Who do you think abuses them? It's the driver. Like, I need to get this done. Give it to the amiable. Give it to the amiable. Give it to the amiable. Just keep giving it to them until they collapse. And then when that person collapses, find another amiable and give it more jobs to that person. Because, again, got to get the job done. And they're so focused on that task, that end goal. It doesn't matter if they abuse people. So you can see that happening very much with the driver. And again, the other problem with the driver too is they don't like compromise. Again, the my way or the highway thing, that's not a very let's share and discuss. That's a straight run over thing. Total opposite of the amiable. Amiable doesn't like to rock the boat, so let's hear what everyone has to say. Whereas the driver's like, I don't care what you have to say. I've got a plan. Make the plan happen. Go. And you can see where that would be very off-putting to people, especially amiable, how they'd feel totally run over. So right there we have the four different, the analytical, amiable, expressive, and the driver. So you have all of those four together. And you can see very much, and if you think about your own personal way that you behave, the way that you think, the way that you interact with people, the way that you handle tasks, the way that you dream about things or don't dream about things, or care about details or don't care about things, you can kind of see which one you fit into, primarily. Now, there's probably a number one. Like I said, you'll be firmly in one, and you'll have your foot in another. So it's just a question of figuring out, well, what's the ratio? So if I were to look at myself, I'd probably be like a 60-40 split, 60% expressive, 40% driver. So I tend to be, I don't like to run over people. So that's why the driver is on the lower side of things. But it's communicology. I can't stop talking. So it's, clearly much more on the expressive side of things. So that's a big part of me. So now where I tend to dabble, of course, is I tend to dabble in the analytical a little bit. Even though I'm super expressive, I don't tend to be an analytical person, but I do dabble in it occasionally. So if I'm spending something big, I pay attention to it. If I spending money on something small, I pay attention to it. Like I go grocery shopping and I'm trying to figure out which one's the best price per pound or price per ounce, so I make the best buying decision and I get all analytical that way. Or if I'm buying a new phone, I'll make a spreadsheet and I'll like figure out like the memory and the chipset and the camera size and all that kind of stuff, and I'll try to figure out what's the best option for this and determine what's the best phone to buy. Or buying a car. I mean, I'm super analytical about that to make sure I get all the right stats and facts and figures right to make the right buying decision on a car. But other than that, a lot of the rest of my life, it's kind of chaotic. Like an Expressive office, if you ever walk into an office of an Expressive, there's papers everywhere, books everywhere, piles and stuff. But they know where their pile is. Like if they know where something is, they know where it is. They just have to figure out which pile it's in. They might even know which pile, but then they'll pull it out and you'll be amazed that they would even know. But that's their filing system. Don't let these books fool you. This is orderly just for the sake of being on a bookshelf. But around me, I've got like papers and stuff laying around and piled up in weird ways. That's an expressive trait. And analytical, everything would be perfect. These books, they'd be on the shelf and they'd be perfectly organized by author, or something like that, or have my own Dewey Decimal System cranked out on these babies. Instead, I have it by section. So like I'll have, theology and philosophy and I'll just have all these different sections and have it broken down there. But there's not really much rhyme or reason other than that. The only ones that make really different is like over here, my media ecology books. They're done. These two shelves are media ecology, but they are alphabet by author's last name. Just so if I know I need to grab something from Arendt, I can grab that. If I need something from Postman, I can grab that. Or McLuhan, grab that. Mumford, grab that. And not have to hunt and peck through 2 rows of books. Other than that, I'm not very analytical now. Because as far as amiable, I tend to have amiable tendencies too. Because, again, like I said, I don't like to run over people. I do like to be concerned with other people. So one thing I've had to learn over time is how to back off that expressiveness. And so instead of being the first to jump out and say something, wait a second, hold it in, let someone else say what they think, and then weigh into it. In fact, whenever I was in politics and I was the chairman of a planning commission, one of the best advices I was ever given was, don't talk first. Because when you're the chair and you talk first, people tend to fall in line behind the chair. Talk last. Let everyone say their piece. Make sure everybody gets a chance to say their piece, and then speak. So I tried putting that in practice and found it was fantastic because I got to much more robust conversation than if I just jumped in and said what was on my mind as an expressive, and then everyone was like, yeah, that's a good idea. And discussion would die fast. So I learned very quickly thanks to that advice I got. And again, it's one of those ways that I've dabbled with the idea of being amiable, to go along to know when to get along to get along. Now, where this stuff really comes into play is, like I said, whenever you're like working with other people, again, it could be a coworker, a teammate, a roommate, a best friend, a family member, whatever. It's important for you to know who you are so you can then keep that in check. Like I said about being expressive, I know I need to keep that in check sometimes. And sometimes I fail at it, and sometimes I'm pretty good at it. But it's a constant learning process. And it's also important to learn the other part. You've heard about the whole idea like men are from Venus, women are from Mars, or the other way, whichever planet people are living on these days. We tend to think it's a male-female thing. No. It's typically falling in one of these 4 personality traits. Women traditionally are more amiable because they're more apt to do interpersonal communication and nurturing relationships, which means keeping things smooth and everyone getting along. Men are typically more along the driver category, the hunter-gatherer type. You can't kind of like negotiate and feel good about, an animal as you're hunting it. You just have to go do it and solve the problem, which is why you tend to have so many problems with male-female relationships, because women say, I'd like to talk. Can I talk to you? And men will be like, sure. And then the woman would start saying the problem that she's having, and the guy would say, oh, all you need to do is this, this, and this, and that'll be solved. And the woman will get mad and say, you never listened to me. And the guy's taken aback, like, what do you mean? I listened to you, I just solved your problem. Well, she didn't want someone to solve her problem. She wanted someone to listen. which is why men are terrible listeners. But also, you should know better. If you go talk to a man's geared towards solving problems. So if you say, I have a problem, a man goes, here's my chance to shine. And that inner driver comes out and it's like, okay, fix this, fix this, fix this. Done. And they solve the problem. But again, if you want that ear, if you want that shoulder to cry on, men are typically terrible for that. Women are great at it, which is why typically if you have a problem, go find a woman and talk to her. It's the same with any other kind of thing you deal with, whether you're talking to another friend, a significant other, a boss, whatever. You just have to know, like, what's my boss? My boss is very amiable. My boss is very much a driver. My boss is very much an analytical and an expressive. I need to know how to walk in to gauge how they're going to be talking with me, and then I can then react and shift my vocal tones, my vocal abilities. Because once you know who you are and once you get a handle on who they are, communication becomes a lot easier as long as you keep in mind where you are and where they are. Because you're not going to change them. You can try to change yourself and adapt, and then you can easily fit into the conversation a lot better. That's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. I really appreciate any extra little tip you can give me there for helping with the YouTube algorithm. If you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. I appreciate you hanging around this long anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.